So, the interest in the aging and longevity space has grown massively over recent years. But the question is, why are so many people suddenly interested in trying to solve the aging problem? Well, the reason is that aging is actually our biggest risk factor for all the major diseases that we suffer from. Just look at these graphs. So we can see that the incidence of cardiovascular disease shoots up after age 50. Dementia, if you don't have it by your 70s, you can kind of assume it's on its way, unfortunately. Just look at cancer. Up until the age of 50, it's tracking nicely along the bottom there. But after 50, the numbers just shoot up. It's straight up our risk. And the reason that these types of diseases are referred to as age-related diseases is that for many people, they will spend around 15 to 20 years in poor health suffering from these diseases. And that means they're outside of their health span. But what happens if we could slow or even reverse aging? Would it mean that we could reduce the risk of these diseases and maybe improve our health span, which is the proportion of our lives that we actually live in good health, not suffering from age-related diseases like these? So, to begin with, the key question is, what actually is aging? And more importantly, how can we slow it? Well, in general terms, aging is considered a loss of homeostasis, repair, and regenerative capacity across the body, which basically results in an accumulation of damage and the development of multiple co-pathologies or multiple diseases. And while aging is generally observed at the surface level and felt across the entire body, actually, everything that we are experiencing at the surface is ultimately driven by critical changes that are happening deep within our bodies at the cellular level. So everything to do with the aging process actually starts inside of our cells. So if we want to treat aging, then first we've got to really understand what is causing it. And an important thing to understand is that aging is not caused by just one thing. There are actually known to be 12 key things that go wrong at the cellular level and drive the entire aging process. And these are now very famously referred to as the hallmarks of aging. Now, for something to be considered as a hallmark of aging, it has to fit three criteria. The first is that it must manifest during normal aging. The second is that its aggravation should accelerate the aging process. And the third is that its amelioration must slow the aging process. Now, the identification of these hallmarks of aging has really marked a shift in understanding aging as not just this single process, but instead as a combination of multiple different cellular changes. And it's also really changed how we treat aging, as it focuses now on finding therapies that change or alter these hallmarks of aging. So now I'm going to take a little look at each individual hallmark, understand what it is and how it leads to aging, and finally how we can potentially target these hallmarks of aging in practice to slow the aging process. Now, the first hallmark that I'm going to cover is genomic instability, which is basically just a fancy way of saying excessive DNA damage. So our DNA is continuously damaged. Even just me sitting here, my own metabolism is damaging my DNA. And that doesn't even consider other things like pollution, UV, our diets. In fact, it's estimated that every day, each cell in our body is suffering from tens of thousands of pieces of DNA damage. Now, when we're young, this wasn't really an issue because our cells are actually very good at repairing DNA. We've got this little army of DNA repair enzymes that are continuously working beneath the surface to repair the damage before it even becomes an issue. But the problem is that we know that this DNA repair in our cells seems to get turned down with age, meaning that the DNA damage begins to sort of accumulate within our cells. Now, because DNA functions as kind of the instruction manual for our cells and our bodies, this means that damaged cells are no longer able to function properly and carry out their important role in our bodies. And a visible example of this is on our skin. Our skin, when it's exposed to excessive UV radiation, shows visible signs of aging, and this is a result of underlying DNA damage. The next hallmark is telomere shortening. So this is actually directly linked to DNA damage. So our telomeres, which can be seen here in the purple caps, are short sections of repetitive DNA, which are basically found on the end of our chromosomes. You can visualize them a bit like the protective caps on the end of our shoelaces. But the role of telomeres is actually to prevent the DNA from unwinding, a bit like the cap on the shoelace would prevent the shoelace from unwinding and fraying. But the problem is that every time a cell divides, these telomeres actually get shorter and shorter, and eventually they run out. And when this happens, our cells can't divide anymore, and this means tissues can't provide enough new cells to replace damaged and old cells. Another hallmark is epigenetic alterations. So again, just going back to the DNA, we know that the DNA inside our cells basically acts as an instruction guide to tell each cell what to become and how to function. But every single cell in our body actually has the same DNA. And this is where epigenetics comes into play. So epigenetics is a pattern of markers, a bit like little tags, which are attached to your DNA. And the specific pattern of these tags tells cells which genes need to be turned on and which genes need to be turned off. And this is why a skin cell becomes a skin cell and a nerve cell becomes a nerve cell, despite them having an identical DNA sequence. Now, as we age, what's been found is that cells suffer from something called epigenetic drift, which is where the pattern of these epigenetic tags changes, or the pattern of genes that are switched on changes. This means that cells start to act differently and effectively they forget their identity, and this leads to multiple age-related problems. Next, let's look at something called cellular senescence. So cellular senescence is actually a really great example of something that works really well to protect us when we're young, but actually becomes damaging when we get older. So as I've mentioned, cells are very good at repairing themselves, but sometimes cells have so much damage that they can no longer repair themselves. And this basically sets off an alarm bell in the cell, basically saying it's a write-off, it needs to be shut down completely. But rather than removing the damaged cell from the body entirely, the body effectively puts the cell to sleep, which is much quicker and easier than having to get rid of it and recycle it. And when we're young, this is good because any severely damaged cells, if they're allowed to divide in the body, could lead to illness, such as cancer. However, senescent cells, whilst they were thought to be sleeping silently, they're actually not. So they actually accumulate in the body. And it's found that these cells don't just sit quietly, they actually secrete a lot of inflammation. And this inflammation is very damaging to the cells around them, which ultimately causes them to become senescent too. It's a bit like having a rotten apple in a fruit bowl. When one goes bad, the rest of them all go bad. And this impacts our entire body. For example, in the skin, senescent fibroblasts can cause a reduction in the production of collagen and elastin by the inflammation that they secrete, which is degrading it. And in the brain, accumulation of senescent neurons can contribute to loss of cognitive function. And not only that, the inflammatory molecules that are secreted by senescent cells can actually further damage tissues and accelerate aging. Another hallmark is called altered intercellular communication. Now, within our bodies, there's lots of intercellular communication going on between different cells and different tissues. So this could be like neuronal signaling or hormones or various other blood signaling molecules. And it's been found that this intercellular communication actually changes with age. And this is actually very obvious when you look at the difference in the composition of a blood sample from an old person and a young person. And in mice, it's been actually shown that if you infuse the blood of a young mouse into an old mouse, it will make the older mouse younger and vice versa. So there's still a lot of debate as to which are the important factors in the blood that are producing these effects. But one of the major changes that is agreed on is increased levels of chronic low-grade inflammatory factors in the blood. And that leads us nicely onto the next hallmark, which is chronic inflammation. So inflammation is well known to be part of our immune function, in the manner that acute inflammation in response to any injury or infection is a good thing. But as we get older, our immune systems become uncontrolled and inflammatory factors are released even when they're not needed. And this leads to chronic low-grade inflammation across the body. And this is bad because it's actually damaging to cells and tissues, and it wastes valuable resources in the body. It's also so important within the cellular aging process that we often refer to it as inflammaging. There are many diseases that are linked with chronic inflammation because of its damaging effects across the body. This includes skin aging, neurodegeneration, and also diabetes. Another hallmark is deregulated nutrient sensing. So many people feel like their metabolism kind of changes as they get older, and there is a scientific basis for this. So within the cells, we actually have two major nutrient sensing pathways. One that detects when there are plentiful nutrients, and it signals the body via a pathway called mTOR to grow. And the other pathway that detects if there is a nutrient scarcity, and it signals the body via another pathway called AMPK to conserve. So in general terms, if you have too much emphasis on growth, i.e. too much mTOR activation and not enough on conservation via AMPK activation, this is pro-aging. And a lot of studies have shown that when mTOR is inhibited and AMPK is activated, this leads to improved longevity. And this is because AMPK basically acts as a switch. It turns on a lot of pathways that are linked with longevity, such as cellular repair, recycling, NAD production, and also reduced inflammation. And in fact, activation of AMPK is why habits such as fasting and exercise are good for our health, because they both create an energy stress which switches on this AMPK pathway and all of these downstream benefits. Now, proteostasis or loss of proteostasis is another hallmark. So in our cells, there are many different proteins which allow them to function. Some proteins exist in the cell for a long time, such as structural proteins, but others are rapidly made and degraded all the time, as they're needed as things like signaling molecules. But the important thing to note is that proteins are 3D structures, and how they function is actually determined by how they are actually folded in the cell. And proteostasis is the quality control system that ensures that all of the proteins in our cells are folded and functioning correctly, and they're also appropriately degraded when they're no longer needed or when they've become damaged. And during aging, what we know is that there's a loss of proteostasis in the cell, and this causes proteins to become sort of misfolded and damaged. They start to aggregate in the cell, and this can lead to age-related conditions like Alzheimer's disease. And proteostasis and sort of protein folding and things like that is kind of connected to another hallmark called autophagy. So autophagy literally means self-eating, and it's the cell's built-in recycling system. And what it does is it collects damaged structures like proteins, mitochondria, and it breaks them down and recycles them. Now, during aging, autophagy declines. And this means that you get an accumulation of damaged structures and effectively cellular junk within the cell, and this drives the aging process. So if you think of your cells as little factories, they require maintenance and repair, and they can't function properly if they're all messed up and they have broken down machines. And one of the key pathways that stimulates autophagy is this AMPK pathway again. Remember, it's the nutrient sensing pathway I mentioned earlier. And AMPK activity declines during aging, but again, you can activate AMPK by creating a little bit of energy stress in your cells via things like exercise or fasting or by certain supplements. Another hallmark, and quite a famous one, is mitochondrial dysfunction. So many of you will have heard of mitochondria. They are these tiny little energy powerhouses in our cells, which essentially convert the food that we eat into all of the energy that our cells need to function, which is a form of energy called ATP. Now, every cell needs ATP to operate, from our muscles, our heart, our brain, our skin. But as we age, it's been found that our mitochondria become dysfunctional. They start to break down, which means they don't produce as much ATP, they don't do it as efficiently, and it has a huge impact on cellular health. They also start to release high levels of free radicals, which are incredibly toxic and damaging to the cells. Now, the repair and recycling pathways within the mitochondria also get turned down, meaning there are less mitochondria in the cells, and those that remain are actually damaged and don't function as well. And this is why things associated with loss of energy are often linked to signs of aging, things like fatigue and brain fog, because our mitochondria just not function as well and not producing the energy like we had when we were younger. Stem cells are another famous type of cell within the longevity space, and stem cell exhaustion is another hallmark of aging. So we know that the stem cells are the body's building blocks, essentially. They are cells that can turn into any different type of cell in the body. And the main function of stem cells is to basically replenish damaged and old cells when they're acquired by different tissues and in response to injury. So the body has this pool of stem cells that it can call upon for this purpose, but it's found that this supply is not infinite. And over time, these cells also lose the capacity to be able to turn into any type of cell. And this is because stem cells are still susceptible to damage themselves. So during aging, they seem to accumulate DNA damage. They can accumulate dysfunctional mitochondria, and this impairs their ability to self-renew and also causes a decline in the regenerative capacity of our organs and tissues. The final hallmark that I want to talk about is gut dysbiosis. So gut health has become a bit of a buzz lately. It's talked about a lot more, and there's a really good reason for this. So your gut actually contains trillions of bacteria, and these form the gut microbiome. And this plays a really important role in digestion and also absorption of the nutrients from your food. But we now know that the gut microbiome actually impacts the whole body, not just the gut. So, for example, the gut microbiome is known to communicate with the brain, our skin, and other organs, and it also influences inflammation across the whole body. So, when you look at the gut microbiome, some bacteria are beneficial and support your health, whilst others can be negative and actually promote chronic inflammation and accelerate the aging process. So studies show that during aging, there's a reduction in the diversity of the microbiome in our gut, and we seem to suffer from more pro-inflammatory bacteria and a reduction in beneficial bacteria, such as those which actually strengthen the gut barrier. And this reduction in gut barrier integrity actually further promotes inflammation, and overall, any disruptions to the gut and the gut microbiome seem to accelerate aging across the whole body. Now, before we can discuss how to target the hallmarks of aging, there's one very important concept to remember, and that is that biology is very complex, and aging is no exception. In fact, aging is probably one of the most complex biological processes that we know. And while we discuss all of these hallmarks as these sort of separate processes, I hope you can kind of begin to understand that some of the hallmarks are actually highly interconnected and they are influencing each other. For example, mitochondrial dysfunction, it results in oxidative stress, which causes DNA damage, and telomere attrition, they trigger cellular senescence. Cellular senescence results in altered communication via the inflammation they secrete. This feeds back and causes more senescence and more communication issues. So you kind of get the picture. It is incredibly complex, and that's why when we're looking to slow aging, we need to target all of these hallmarks and not just one. So how might we actually try to do this? How would we go about targeting the hallmarks of aging? Well, one area that has gained a tremendous amount of research within the longevity space surrounds a molecule called NAD. Now, NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and it's found in every single cell in your body. It's very important for cellular energy production and also cellular maintenance and repair. Now, as a general rule of thumb, if you have high levels of NAD, you get lots of energy production, lots of repair, healthy cells. If you have low levels of NAD, repair gets turned down, energy gets turned down, and your cells start to accumulate damage. Now, the interesting thing is that NAD has been found to be something that impacts all of the hallmarks of aging. And the reason that it impacts all of the hallmarks of aging is it's because it's found in every single cell. And it performs such a wide range of functions in the cell. If you think about it, it's crucial to energy production in the mitochondria, but its other main function is to switch on and off important repair pathways. So, for example, NAD is driving things like DNA repair. It's driving things that are dealing with inflammation, activating autophagy. So if NAD levels go down in the cells, it actually promotes or makes worse the hallmarks of aging. But if you boost NAD levels, it seems to reduce the hallmarks of aging. So NAD's been the focus of research for many years now, and there have been hundreds of studies now that have demonstrated that if you can restore cellular NAD levels, then it results in incredible benefits to cellular health. Everything from, things really at the cellular energy, like improving mitochondrial function, repairing DNA damage, all the way through to more, things at the whole body level, like restoring muscle function, improve cognitive function, insulin sensitivity, age-related issues like the decline in cardiovascular function. So as a result, many scientists really believe that maintaining high levels of NAD as you age is a really promising way to look at trying to slow the cellular aging process, and most importantly, trying to maintain health span. So a key question is, well, how can you boost NAD levels? And a lot of people at this point think, well, it must be some sort of drug, and only drugs can be powerful enough to act at the cellular level to be able to increase NAD and slow aging. But actually, this is a really common misconception, because when any substance enters the body, your body doesn't know whether it came from a drug, from a supplement, or from a food molecule, from a nutrient. Actually, all of these molecules that go into our body are biologically active. And in fact, in scientific research, many natural molecules often outperform the drug molecules. So when formulating our product, which is Nuchido Time Plus, we actually chose all natural ingredients, as this is the most bioavailable format. So each ingredient was chosen for its ability to target a key part of the NAD network. Because we know that there are a couple of reasons of why NAD declines. We know it declines because our body loses the ability to be able to make and recycle NAD, and also because there's a lot of damage in inflammatory proteins and processes that are actually using up and draining our NAD supplies. So each of the different ingredients was chosen for a very specific reason to act upon this NAD network. And this combination of ingredients in Nuchido Time Plus is actually being clinically proven in a human double-blind placebo-controlled study to restore youthful NAD production. So let's just look at the different ingredients in Nuchido Time Plus and how they actually work together to actually target multiple different hallmarks of aging. So here are some of the ingredients that are included within the product. We have Sephora japonica extract, which is actually a flower extract, but it contains a powerful ingredient called quercetin and also rutin. We have alpha lipoic acid, and we also have green tea leaf extract, which contains a compound called EGCG, which is a very powerful natural active ingredient. Parsley leaf is included in there for an active that it contains called Epigenetic. And we also put a precursor to NAD in there. So a precursor is basically a building block that your body can use to make NAD. And the one that we use is nicotinamide because it is the body's preferred NAD precursor. Now, some of these compounds may sound pretty familiar to you because they've got a wide range of benefits. And, some of them are even consumed on a daily basis, like tea and herbs like parsley. But let's just look at actually how this combination of ingredients and how increased NAD can actually target the hallmarks of aging. So, genomic instability, major driver of the aging process, this DNA damage problem. Well, what we know is that NAD is critical to drive any DNA repair enzymes in the cell. So there are DNA repair enzymes such as PARP1 and also Sirtuins, which drive other repair processes, which are basically relying on NAD to power their function. And conditions that are associated with premature aging have been shown that they have reduced NAD levels and a reduced DNA repair capability. So we know that our product boosts NAD levels, which can drive a lot of these repair processes. Telomere shortening, again, we know that short telomeres disrupt NAD production and also increase CD38 expression. NAD restoration is known to actually activate the sirtuins. Now, the sirtuins are these longevity proteins that basically rely on NAD as a fuel. And when the sirtuins are active, this actually helps to alleviate telomere dysfunction and lead to lengthening of the telomeres. Epigenetic drift, again, NAD is intimately involved in many things to do with DNA repair and DNA function. But what we know is that NAD is really involved in regulating which genes are switched on and off. And again, this works through the sirtuins. So the sirtuins are basically enzymes which remove these epigenetic tags. In this case, they're acetyl tags from DNA to switch off genes. And this promotes gene expression patterns that are actually linked with longevity. So when you have less NAD, sirtuin activity goes down, which means the genes that it is turning off are not getting turned off. And this leads to altered gene expression during the aging process. Senescent cells and NAD are also kind of a bit like a chicken and an egg situation. So what we know is that if you have low NAD levels, it promotes senescence because you get more damage accumulating in the cells. So more cells have to, get so much damage in them that they become senescent and they have to be put to sleep. But then we also know that if you have lots of senescent cells, then this actually promotes a lot of inflammatory cytokines to be released, which then promotes inflammation, which then actually drains our NAD levels through a protein known as CD38. So it's not really known whether it's which one starts first, whether it's the low NAD or the senescent cells that are starting the problem. But what we know is that if you have low NAD, then this is a problem because you get more senescence. But if you increase NAD levels, it promotes cellular repair and it prevents the accumulation of damage. So you actually get less senescence. Now, quercetin, which is an ingredient in our product, isn't actually known to be a senolytic. So this is a molecule that actually removes senescent cells from the body and also reduces some of the inflammatory junk that the cells are giving off via inhibition of a particular factor called NF-kappa B, which is like a master regulator of the inflammatory process that seems to become overactive as we get older. When we're looking at cellular communication and inflammation, we know, as I've just mentioned, that NAD via its link with the sirtuins regulates NF-kappa B. And we know that this coordinates the inflammatory response. So if we've got low NAD, it actually means NF-kappa B becomes overexpressed, and it's this drive in this incredibly inflammatory cascade during aging. And if we have higher NAD, then we know it gets turned down. We also know that EGCG and some of the other polyphenols in the product also indirectly can help to reduce inflammation. So NAD is actually really critical when it comes to sensing the energetic status of the cell for adaptation to energy stress. So if you have low NAD, it's basically telling the cell that the cell is in a state of energy stress and it needs to switch on lots of different beneficial pathways to actually trick the cell into repairing itself. And several ingredients in the product, including alpha lipoic acid, rutin, quercetin, apigenin, and also the EGCG, actually activate AMPK, which switches on NAD production, and it activates cellular repair processes in the cell and also increases energy production via the mitochondria. Proteostasis and autophagy, these two things that are really required to keep all the proteins and the cellular junk from accumulating in the cell. Again, we know that NAD switches on pathways via Sirtuin to activate autophagy to actually recycle these damaged proteins. So again, increasing NAD helps to increase autophagy. And NAD has also been shown in studies to be necessary for activation of what is called the unfolded protein response, which helps to regulate proteostasis and also regulates the quality of mitochondrial proteins to make sure our mitochondria are all in good health and functioning efficiently and correctly. Now, when it comes to the mitochondria, we know that NAD and having adequate NAD is absolutely critical for mitochondrial function. If we did not have any NAD in our cells, we'd literally be dead in 30 seconds because the pathways in our mitochondria that require NAD simply would not be able to work, and we'd not be able to have any energy to keep us alive. So NAD is very, very important for mitochondrial function, very directly. Now, other ways that NAD is really important for mitochondrial function is for mitochondrial repair. So NAD powers the sirtuins, which again switch on pathways that not only repair damaged mitochondria, but also promote the production of new mitochondria. So this is something called mitochondrial biogenesis, and also promote the removal of damaged mitochondria. So this is mitophagy. So this is like autophagy, but for the mitochondria. And NAD helps to drive this process. And again, we know the stem cells are so important. And just like how NAD helps with the cellular health of any cell, this is also equally important in terms of making sure those stem cells are in good health. And there's multiple polyphenols within the product that help to induce stem cell activation and differentiation. Now, gut dysbiosis is really interesting. We know that NAD supports energy production within microbes, so not just within our own cells, but within the gut microbiome as well. And it's also required for some of the enzymes that support microbial survival and reproduction within the gut. And interestingly, a recent human study showed that increased NAD levels actually improved gut composition by increasing levels of beneficial bacteria, which is exactly what we want to be happening in our guts. So thank you so much for listening. I'm really glad that we've been able to explain how NAD is so important for multiple hallmarks of aging and how this can actually contribute to just improving cellular function and hopefully extending our health span.